March 15, 1987. Location, Millfield, Oregon. The rain drummed against the windows of the Hartwell photography studio like impatient fingers. Inside, Margaret Hartwell adjusted the lights around her final client of the day, a family portrait for the Donnellys. 3 generations squeezed into the frame, grandparents, parents, and 2 young children with gap-toothed smiles. "Hold still, Emma," Margaret called to the fidgeting 6-year-old. "Just one more shot." The flash popped. The family relaxed. Margaret wound the film advance, but something felt wrong. The camera jammed. She tried again. Nothing. "I'm sorry, folks," she said, forcing a smile. "Technical difficulties. Let me get this sorted, and we'll try again." But as the Donnellys gathered their coats, Margaret noticed something odd. The film counter hadn't moved, but she could have sworn she'd heard the shutter click. She opened the camera back carefully. Empty. The film cartridge was gone. That was the first sign something was wrong at Hartwell Studio. By morning, Margaret would discover that every roll of film from the past month had vanished from her darkroom safe. By evening, she would find them returned, developed, printed, and arranged in neat stacks with one addition to each family portrait. A stranger standing just behind the subjects, always slightly out of focus, always watching. By the end of the week, Margaret Hartwell would be dead, and her studio would be boarded up. The official cause was listed as suicide, though no note was ever found. The photographs that had been returned to her safe disappeared again, this time forever. Or so everyone thought. October 12th, 2024. Location, estate sale, Millfield, Oregon. Dana Pierce hadn't planned to stop at the estate sale. She was driving through Millfield on her way to Portland, taking the scenic route to clear her head after a particularly brutal divorce proceeding. But something about the handwritten sign, Hartwell Estate, Final Sale, made her pull over. The house was a converted Victorian, all bay windows and gingerbread trim. A small addition jutted from the back, probably the old studio space. Dana wandered through rooms filled with the detritus of a photographer's life. Enlargers, chemical trays, boxes of photo paper yellow with age. Most buyers were drawn to the antique furniture and jewelry. Dana found herself in the basement, sifting through boxes of miscellaneous equipment. That's where she found the filing cabinet. It was locked, but the estate sale volunteer, a tired-looking woman in her 70s, waved dismissively when Dana asked about it. "Take the whole thing for $50, she said. "We can't get it open anyway. Margaret's nephew wants it all gone by Sunday." Dana loaded the cabinet into her SUV. She'd been looking for storage for her own photography business, and vintage furniture had character. It wasn't until she got home to her studio apartment in Portland that she realized the lock wasn't actually engaged. Just rusted shut. A little WD-40 and it popped open. Inside were files, hundreds of them. Client records dating back to the 1970s, meticulously organized by date and family name. Each file contained negatives, contact sheets, and finished prints. Standard portrait studio work, weddings, graduations, family photos. But tucked in the very back, in a folder marked Private Do Not Process, Dana found something else. Film canisters, dozens of them, all undeveloped, all labeled with dates from 1987, and beneath them a single typed note. They watch from inside the frame. Development will confirm presence. Do not print alone. Do not print at night. M.H. Dana stared at the note. Margaret Hartwell's initials. She'd read about the photographer's death, a brief mention in a local history blog about Millfield's forgotten mysteries. But this suggested Margaret had been working on something when she died, something that scared her. Dana was a professional photographer. She had her own darkroom, her own equipment. The rational part of her mind said these were probably just experiments, double exposures, artistic projects, maybe even practical jokes. but as she held one of the canisters up to the light, she could see the film inside had been exposed. There were images waiting in the dark. Against her better judgment, Dana decided to develop them. October 13th, 2024. Location: Dana's Darkroom, Portland, Oregon. The first roll was Amateur Family Snapshots, a birthday party from 1987. Dana recognized the setup: cake on a picnic table, balloons tied to chairs, adults standing around with drinks, while children played in the background. Standard candid photography. But as the images appeared in the developer solution, Dana noticed something odd. In every shot, there was an extra figure, not a family member, someone standing at the edge of the frame, partially obscured by shadows or other people. The figure appeared to be an adult male, tall, wearing what looked like a dark jacket. His face was never quite in focus, but he was clearly watching the celebration. Dana checked the contact sheet Margaret had made from the original session. In those images, the figure wasn't there. She developed the second roll, a wedding reception, also from 1987. Again, the mysterious figure appeared in multiple shots, standing by the gift table near the bar, always on the periphery, always watching. And again, he was absent from Margaret's original prints. The third roll made Dana's hands shake. It was the Donnelly family portrait, the last session mentioned in Margaret's appointment book. But this wasn't the formal posed shot. These were candid images taken before or after the session. The family was relaxed, laughing, the children playing while the adults chatted, and standing directly behind little Emma Donnelly, close enough to touch her shoulder, was the figure. This time his face was clearer, thin, angular, with deep-set eyes that seemed to look directly at the camera, at Margaret, at whoever was developing these images decades later. Dana stumbled backward, knocking over a bottle of Stop Bath. The chemical splashed across the floor as she fumbled for the light switch. In the harsh, fluorescent light, the photographs looked different, normal. The figure was still there, but somehow less threatening. Just a man caught in the background of someone else's memory. But Dana couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking at her now. October 14th, 2024. Location: Millfield Public Library. Dana drove back to Millfield the next morning. She needed to understand what Margaret Hartwell had been investigating and why it had scared her enough to hide the film. The library was a small brick building that smelled of old books and floor wax. The local history section took up one corner, presided over by a librarian who looked old enough to have checked out Margaret's first camera manual. "You're asking about Margaret Hartwell?" The woman, her nameplate read Mrs. Chen, peered at Dana over wire-rimmed glasses. "That's a name I haven't heard in years." "I'm researching local photographers," Dana said carefully. "I understand she had a studio here until the late 80s. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "Lovely woman, terrible what happened." She paused, studying Dana more carefully. "You're not family, are you?" "No, just professionally interested." Mrs. Chen led her to a table stacked with yearbooks and newspaper archives. Margaret did all the school photos, most of the weddings, family portraits. She was very good, very thorough. Thorough? She noticed things, details other people missed. Mrs. Chen pulled out a newspaper clipping from March 1987. That's why what happened to the Donnelly girl was so hard on her. Dana's blood chilled. The Donnelly girl? Emma, 6 years old, went missing 3 days after Margaret took their family portrait. They found her a week later in the woods outside town. Mrs. Chen's voice dropped. Margaret blamed herself, said she should have seen something, should have noticed. But how could she have known? Dana stared at the newspaper photo. Emma Donnelly, the same child she'd seen in the developed film, the same child who'd had the mysterious figure standing behind her. Did they ever find who took her? Mrs. Chen shook her head. No suspects, no leads. Just a little girl who wandered too far from home, they said. But Margaret, she kept insisting there was more to it. Started developing conspiracy theories, talking about people who didn't belong in the photographs. What kind of people? That's when we knew she was having a breakdown. She claimed there was a man who appeared in multiple family sessions, always in the background, always watching the children. She said he was hunting. Dana felt the room tilt slightly. Did anyone else see these photographs? Oh, honey, Mrs. Chen said sadly. There were no photographs. Margaret had destroyed all her negatives in some kind of paranoid episode. That's what made her death so tragic. She was clearly suffering from delusions. But Donna knew better. The negatives hadn't been destroyed. They'd been hidden. October 15th, 2024. Location, Millfield Cemetery. Emma Donnelly's grave was small and simple. Just a name, 2 dates. Born January 15th, 1981, died March 25th, 1987. And a carved angel with weathered wings. Someone had left fresh flowers recently. Donna knelt beside the headstone, feeling foolish but compelled. She'd brought one of the developed photographs, the one showing the figure behind Emma. In daylight, it seemed almost harmless, just a man at a family gathering. But Margaret Hartwell had seen something else, something worth hiding undeveloped film for 37 years. She was a sweet girl. Dana spun around. An elderly man stood a few feet away, holding a small bouquet of daisies. He was tall, thin, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. "You knew Emma?" Dana asked. "I'm her grandfather, Tom Donnelly." He approached the grave slowly, his movements careful. "I come here every few weeks. Old habit, I suppose." "I'm sorry for your loss." Tom placed the flowers beside the angel. "It was a long time ago, but you never really get over losing a grandchild, especially not like that." Dana hesitated, then pulled out the photograph. "Mr. Donnelly, I'm researching Margaret Hartwell's photography work. I found some undeveloped film from 1987. Would you mind looking at something?" Tom took the photograph, squinting slightly. His face went very still. "Where did you get this?" "It was in Margaret's files. I developed it yesterday." Tom stared at the image for a long time. When he looked up, his face was pale. "That man," he said quietly, "behind Emma. I remember him." Dana's heart rate spiked. "From the photography session?" "No." Tom shook his head slowly. "From the search. When Emma went missing, the whole town turned out to look for her. This man, he volunteered to help, seemed very concerned, very helpful. He knew the woods well, said he'd grown up hunting in those areas." "Did you tell the police?" "Of course, they interviewed all the volunteers, but he had an alibi for when Emma disappeared, said he was at work, and he seemed genuinely upset about what happened to her." Tom handed the photograph back. "What I never understood was how he knew to volunteer. The search wasn't organized until the second day Emma was missing, but he showed up at our house the morning after she disappeared, before we'd even called the authorities, said he'd heard about it and wanted to help." Dana felt the pieces clicking into place. "Do you remember his name?" "David something. David ... Tom frowned, concentrating. "David Marsh. He said he worked for the county doing maintenance on the back roads. That's how he knew the woods so well." That night, Dana sat in her hotel room with her laptop open, searching every database she could access. David Marsh, county employee, 1987. The search turned up nothing. No employment records, no tax filings, no driver's license issued in Oregon during that time period. But when she broadened the search to include surrounding states and adjusted the time frame, she found something that made her blood run cold. David Marsh, 34, had been arrested in Northern California in 1989 for the abduction and murder of 2 children. He'd been linked to at least 6 other cases across Oregon, Washington, and California between 1985 and 1989. His method was always the same: integrate himself into small communities, attend family gatherings and public events, identify vulnerable children, then strike when opportunities arose. He'd been executed in 1995, but Margaret Hartwell had been documenting his presence in Millfield 2 years before anyone knew what he was. October 16, 2024. Location: Dana's hotel room, Millfield. Dana called the FBI's cold case unit from her hotel room. She explained about the photographs, about Margaret Hartwell's hidden files, about the connection to David Marsh. The agent who took her call was polite but skeptical. "Ma'am, the Marsh case was closed decades ago. We have conclusive evidence linking him to multiple homicides, and he was executed for those crimes. I'm not sure what you think you've discovered, but—" "He was in Millfield in 1987, Dana interrupted. "I have photographic evidence placing him at family events in the months before Emma Donnelly's murder." "Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. Marsh is dead. The case is closed." But Dana wasn't ready to let it go. That evening, she called Margaret Hartwell's nephew, the one who'd inherited the house and organized the estate sale. "Uncle Robert?" The man, his name was Scott Hartwell, sounded confused. "I'm sorry, but Margaret was my aunt. She never had any children." But the estate sale coordinator said, "I think there might be some confusion. I organized the sale myself. Margaret left everything to me. But I live in Seattle now. I hired a local company to handle the actual sale." Dana felt a chill. What was the name of the company? Honestly, I don't remember. Some local outfit. They came highly recommended, said they specialized in estate sales for deceased photographers. They knew all about Margaret's work, seemed very knowledgeable." "Do you have their contact information?" "I should somewhere, but they said they'd handle everything and send me a check for the proceeds. I haven't heard from them since the sale ended." Dana hung up and immediately called the number she'd been given for the estate sale company. Disconnected. The address turned out to be a vacant lot. Someone had organized Margaret Hartwell's estate sale under false pretenses. Someone who knew about her hidden photographs and wanted to make sure they ended up in the right hands. Or the wrong ones. October 17th, 2024. Location: Hartwell Photography Studio, abandoned. Dana returned to the old studio building against her better judgment. It stood empty now, windows boarded, a for lease sign leaning against the front door. But the back entrance, the one that led directly to the old darkroom, was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of chemicals and dust. Light leaked through gaps in the boards, creating dramatic shadows across the abandoned workspace. Enlargers sat like mechanical skeletons, their arms reaching toward empty tables. But the space wasn't entirely empty. Someone had been here recently. On the main work table, arranged in careful rows, were photographs, dozens of them, all recent, all showing families at various events, birthday parties, school functions, holiday gatherings, and in every single image, standing somewhere in the background, was a figure that shouldn't have been there. Not David Marsh. This figure was younger, slighter, with dark hair and sharp features, but the positioning was identical, always on the periphery, always watching, always focused on the children. Dana's hand shook as she examined the images. Some were taken with telephoto lenses from a distance. Others looked like they'd been shot from inside the crowds, the photographer moving unnoticed among the families. At the center of the display was a note, typed on an old manual typewriter. The work continues. Margaret saw the pattern but couldn't stop it. You developed what she hid. Now you see what she saw. The watchers are still watching. The hunters are still hunting. Check your own photographs, Dana. Check what you captured today. Dana's throat closed. She fumbled for her camera, scrolling through the digital images she'd taken over the past few days. The cemetery, the library, the hotel, the street outside Margaret's old studio. In every image, barely visible in the background, was the same figure from the photographs on the table. Following her, documenting her investigation, watching her, she ran. October 18th, 2024, location, Portland Police Department. "Let me understand this correctly," Detective Rodriguez said, reviewing Dana's statement. "You believe someone is continuing the work of a serial killer who was executed in 1995. "I know how it sounds," Dana said, "but the evidence is all there. The photographs, the pattern, the way my investigation was manipulated from the beginning." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. "Ms. Pierce, you're a photographer. You understand how easy it is to manipulate images, especially with digital technology. These aren't digital manipulations, they're film photographs, and the pattern goes back to 1987. According to you, but we only have your word that these photographs came from Margaret Hartwell's files. For all we know, you created them yourself." Dana stared at him. "Why would I do that?" "I don't know. But I do know that people sometimes create elaborate hoaxes for attention, for money, for psychological reasons we don't understand." Dana left the police station feeling frustrated and frightened. If law enforcement wouldn't take her seriously, she was on her own. But as she walked to her car, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You're asking the right questions, but you're asking them to the wrong people. The watchers have been part of the system for longer than you know. Meet me at Riverside Park, East Pavilion, 9 p.m. Come alone. -M.M. Margaret." That was impossible. Margaret Hartwell had been dead for 37 years. But Dana went to the park anyway. October 18th, 2024, 9 p.m. Location, Riverside Park, Portland. The pavilion was empty except for a single figure sitting on a bench in the shadows. As Dana approached, she realized it was a woman in her 70s, thin and nervous, constantly glancing around as if expecting to be followed. "You're Dana Pierce?" the woman asked. "Yes, who are you?" "My name is Helen Garrett. I was Margaret Hartwell's assistant in the 1980s. She gestured for Dana to sit. "I sent you that text, but you signed it M. For Margaret. I've been carrying her message for 37 years, waiting for someone to find those photographs." Dana sat down slowly. "You knew about the hidden film?" Helen nodded. "I helped her hide it. Margaret discovered what David Marsh was doing months before Emma Donnelly disappeared. She'd been noticing him in family photographs for over a year. Always in the background, always watching the children. She tried to warn people, but nobody believed her. Because there was no evidence in her official prints." Exactly. Marsh was careful. He only appeared in candid shots, when families weren't paying attention to who else was around. Margaret started keeping separate rolls of film, documenting his presence. She was building a case. "What happened?" Helen's voice dropped. She confronted him, told him she knew what he was doing, that she had evidence. He promised to leave town if she destroyed the photographs. But she didn't destroy them. She couldn't. She knew he was lying, knew he'd just moved somewhere else and hurt other children. So she hid the film and started working with a federal task force that was tracking similar cases across multiple states. Dana frowned. "I couldn't find any record of FBI involvement in Margaret's death because they covered it up." Helen's hands clenched in her lap. Margaret was killed 3 days before she was supposed to turn over her evidence. They made it look like suicide, discredited her work, and buried the investigation. They? Who's they? Helen looked around nervously. The network. David Marsh wasn't working alone. He was part of something bigger. People who protected predators, who moved them from town to town when they got too much attention. Some were in law enforcement, some were in government, some were just ordinary people who got paid to look the other way. Dana felt sick. And this network is still active? Margaret's death sent a message. Investigate too closely, ask too many questions, and you'll end up like her. Most people got the hint. But not you. Helen smiled sadly. I was young and scared in 1987. I kept quiet and hated myself for it. But I've been watching, waiting for someone to find Margaret's evidence and finish what she started. What about the photographs I found in the studio? The recent ones. Helen's face went pale. Those weren't there when I checked last month. Someone's been using Margaret's old darkroom. Using it for what? The same thing she was doing, documenting the watchers. But this time, they're documenting the people who get too close to the truth. Dana stood up quickly. I need to go to the police. The police can't help you, Helen said. Some of them are part of it, but there's someone who can. She handed Dana a business card. Special Agent Lisa Chen, FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. She's been investigating the network for years. She's the one who asked me to watch for anyone who might find Margaret's evidence. Agent Chen knows about all this. She's Margaret's niece. Mrs. Chen from the library, that's her aunt. Lisa has been building her own case, but she needs Margaret's photographs to prove the connection between past and present. Dana stared at the card. How do I know I can trust her? Because, Helen said, standing to leave, she's the only one who's been looking for the truth as long as I have. October 19th, 2024. Location, FBI Field Office, Portland. Agent Lisa Chen was younger than Dana had expected, maybe mid-30s with sharp eyes and the kind of focused intensity that comes from years of hunting predators. Her office was sparse except for a wall covered with photographs, maps, and timeline charts. Helen Garrett contacted me last night, Agent Chen said, without preamble. She said you found Margaret's hidden evidence. Dana nodded, placing the developed photographs on Chen's desk, along with some newer images that suggest the network is still active. Chen examined each photograph carefully, occasionally making notes or checking details against materials on her wall. These are exactly what we've been looking for, she said finally. David Marsh was killed in prison in 1995, not executed as the public records show. He was murdered by another inmate, probably to keep him from talking about the network that protected him. So there's definitely a larger organization. We call them the Archive. They're a loose network of individuals who identify, protect, and relocate people who prey on children. Some do it for money, others have their own interests. They've been active since at least the 1970s, probably longer. Chen pointed to one of the maps on her wall. Margaret Hartwell wasn't their first victim. We've identified at least 12 other photographers, journalists, and investigators who died under suspicious circumstances after getting too close to the truth. And the recent photographs? The ones showing someone following me? Chen's expression darkened. The Archive has evolved. They now actively monitor people who stumble onto evidence of their activities. Sometimes they discredit the person. Sometimes they eliminate them. Dana felt her mouth go dry. What about sometimes? Sometimes they recruit them. The room fell silent. Dana stared at the wall of evidence, trying to process the scope of what Chen was describing. "What do you need from me?" Dana asked finally. "I need you to go back to Millfield. The new photographs suggest someone is using Margaret's old studio as a base of operations. We need to identify who, and we need to catch them in the act." "That sounds incredibly dangerous." "It is," Chen admitted, "but you're already in danger. The only way out is through." October 20th, 2024. Location, Millfield, Oregon. Surveillance. Dana sat in her rental car across from the old photography studio, a wireless camera trained on the back entrance. Agent Chen and her team were positioned around the building, waiting for whoever had been using Margaret's darkroom to return. They didn't have to wait long. At 11:47 p.m., a figure approached the building from the wooded area behind it. Male, average height, wearing dark clothing and carrying a camera bag. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who'd made this trip many times before. Dana watched through binoculars as he unlocked the back door and disappeared inside. Moments later, a red light appeared in the darkroom window, the safe light that photographers used when developing film. "Subject is inside and active," Chen's voice crackled through Dana's earpiece. "We're moving in." But as the FBI team approached the building, the red light suddenly went out. The back door opened and the figure emerged. But this time he wasn't alone. He was dragging someone. Dana's blood froze as she recognized the second figure, a young girl, maybe 10 years old, unconscious or drugged. The man hoisted her over his shoulder and began moving quickly toward the tree line. "He's got a child," Dana said into her radio. "Southeast corner, heading for the woods." The arrest was swift and violent. The man, who identified himself as Robert Vance, a freelance photographer from Seattle, tried to run but was tackled before he reached the tree line. The girl was alive but sedated, probably with the same drugs that had been used on Margaret Hartwell's victims decades earlier. In Vance's camera bag, agents found over 200 photographs documenting local children at schools, parks, and family events. His car contained restraints, sedatives, and a detailed map of the area marked with potential dump sites. But the most disturbing discovery was in the darkroom itself. October 21st, 2024. Location, FBI Evidence Processing, Portland. Agent Chen laid out the contents of Robert Vance's darkroom across several tables in the FBI's evidence processing facility. Dana stood beside her, trying to make sense of what they'd found. "These are client files," Chen said, pointing to a stack of folders, "but not for photography services. Each folder contains detailed information about a child, their routines, their families, their vulnerabilities." The files went back years. Some contained children who'd been reported missing in other states. Others showed kids who were still alive, still unaware they were being stalked. "How did he get this information?" Dana asked. "The same way David Marsh did in the 1980s. He integrated himself into communities, volunteered for school events, offered to photograph family gatherings for free. Parents thought he was just a nice man who loved taking pictures of children." Chen opened another folder. Inside were correspondence and payment records, showing that Vance had been in contact with at least 15 other individuals across 6 states. The archive wasn't just still active, it had grown. "There's something else," Chen said grimly. She pointed to a leather-bound journal found in Vance's possession. "He's been keeping detailed records of his activities, including names of people who've gotten too close to the truth." Dana's name was in the journal, along with notes about her investigation and a photograph of her entering Margaret Hartwell's old studio. But she wasn't the only one being watched. The journal contained a list of 12 other names: journalists, police officers, former FBI agents, and private investigators who'd all stumbled onto pieces of the archive's activities over the years. 7 of the names had been crossed out in red ink. "What does that mean?" Dana asked, though she suspected she already knew. "It means 7 people who asked too many questions are now dead," Chen said quietly. November 3rd, 2024. Location: Multnomah County Courthouse, Portland. Robert Vance's preliminary hearing was closed to the public, but Dana was allowed to attend as a witness. She sat in the gallery watching as prosecutors laid out evidence of his crimes. The photographs, the surveillance records, the drugged child found in his possession. But what struck her most was Vance himself. He sat calmly at the defense table, occasionally taking notes, showing no emotion as the details of his predatory behavior were read aloud. When he looked around the courtroom, his gaze was calculating, analytical, like he was cataloging everyone present for future reference. During a recess, Agent Chen approached Dana in the hallway. "We've made some progress breaking down his network," she said. "Vance is cooperating in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He's given us names, locations, operational details." "How many people are we talking about?" "At least 40 active participants across 11 states. Some are photographers like Vance and Margaret's original stalker. Others are facilitators, people who help relocate predators when they attract attention. A few are what they call cleaners, people who eliminate threats to the network." Dana felt sick. People like Margaret. "And potentially like you, if we hadn't caught Vance when we did." Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. "There's something else. Vance claims the archive has been documenting its activities since the 1960s, not just for operational purposes, but as trophies. He says there's a central repository containing thousands of photographs and hours of video evidence. Where? He doesn't know. The archive compartmentalizes information to protect itself, but he believes it's somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, probably in a location that's been under their control for decades." Dana stared out the courthouse windows at the Portland skyline. Somewhere out there, in a building that looked perfectly ordinary from the outside, was a collection of evidence documenting decades of crimes against children. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Help us find it." November 15th, 2024. Location: abandoned sawmill, Mount Hood National Forest. The tip came from an unexpected source: Helen Garrett, Margaret Hartwell's former assistant. She'd been going through her own stored belongings and found a map Margaret had given her in 1987, a hand-drawn sketch showing the location of what Margaret had called the archive building. Agent Chen's team approached the abandoned sawmill complex just before dawn. The main building had been closed since the early 1990s, but recent tire tracks in the dirt access road suggested it wasn't entirely abandoned. Dana followed the FBI team through the complex, her camera documenting everything they found. Most of the buildings were empty shells, but the old office structure had been modified. New locks, security cameras, and what appeared to be a generator-powered electrical system. In the basement, they found it. The archive was exactly what Robert Vance had described: a meticulously organized collection of photographs, films, and documentation spanning more than 50 years. Filing cabinets lined the walls, each one labeled with years and geographic regions. Dozens of film projectors and photography equipment filled the center of the room. But it was the walls that made Dana's hands shake. Covering every available surface were photographs, thousands of them. Children at play, families on vacation, school events, birthday parties, all seemingly innocent except for one detail. In every single image, somewhere in the background, was an adult who didn't belong. Watching. Waiting. Hunting. "My God," Agent Chen whispered, "this is evidence of thousands of crimes." In the center of the room sat a desk with a typewriter. the same model that had been used to type the note Dana found in Margaret's old studio. Beside it was a stack of fresh photographs, still damp from the developer solution. The images showed the FBI team's approach to the sawmill. Someone had been watching them, documenting their investigation just as the archive had documented its victims for decades. But the photographer was gone. Whoever maintained the archive had vanished, leaving behind only the evidence of their crimes and a single typed note on the desk. The work continues elsewhere. The watchers are always watching. The archive is eternal. December 20th, 2024. Location: Dana's Studio, Portland. Dana's exhibition opened on a cold Thursday evening in December. The gallery walls were lined with Margaret Hartwell's photographs, the hidden images that had started everything, alongside the evidence recovered from the archive. But these weren't displayed as crime scene photos. Dana had printed them as large-format art pieces, forcing viewers to confront the reality of what they were seeing. Ordinary family moments corrupted by the presence of predators hiding in plain sight. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a timeline spanning from 1965 to 2024, showing how the archive had operated across decades. Names, dates, locations, and most importantly, faces, both victims and perpetrators. Agent Chen attended the opening, along with several survivors of archive crimes who'd been identified through the recovered photographs. "This is important work," Chen told Dana as they stood before a display showing David Marsh's appearance at multiple family events in Millfield. "Public awareness is our best defense against networks like this. Has there been any progress finding the people who escaped?" Chen shook her head. "They've gone underground, probably permanently, but we've disrupted their operations in 11 states and rescued 43 children who were being stalked for future abduction." Dana nodded, but she knew it wasn't over. Earlier that week, she'd received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, herself at the gallery, hanging Margaret Hartwell's images for the exhibition. The photo had been taken from outside, through the window, with a telephoto lens. Someone was still watching. Someone was still documenting, but this time Dana was ready for them. She'd hidden cameras throughout the gallery and her studio. She'd shared all her evidence with multiple law enforcement agencies and journalists. She'd made herself too visible to disappear quietly. The archive might continue its work elsewhere, but it would do so knowing that people like Margaret Hartwell, and now Dana Pierce, would never stop looking for the watchers in the shadows. Because in the end, the best defense against those who hunt from within the frame is to make sure someone is always watching them back. Epilogue, January 2025. Location undisclosed. The basement was smaller than the old archive, but it served its purpose. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, each one labeled with precise handwriting. The center of the room contained photography equipment, computers, and most importantly, the collection. The photographs covered 3 walls now, arranged in careful chronological order. The newest edition showed Dana Pierce at her gallery opening, Agent Chen leaving the FBI building, Helen Garrett walking her dog in a suburban neighborhood. The figure behind the camera worked methodically, developing the latest roll of film in the makeshift darkroom. Each image was examined carefully, cataloged and filed according to the system that had been in place for decades. The archive had survived worse than Robert Vance's arrest. It had survived Margaret Hartwell's investigation in 1987, the federal task force raids in the 1990s, and dozens of other close calls over the years. It survived because it adapted, because it learned, because it always had contingency plans. On the desk beside the developer trays sat a leather journal, its pages filled with neat entries. January 3rd, 2025. Pierce exhibition generates significant media attention. Network exposure substantial but contained. Recommend Phase 7 protocols. January 8, 2025. Agent Chen reassigned to Behavioral Analysis Headquarters. Surveillance opportunities limited, but manageable. January 12, 2025. Garrett H. shows signs of increased paranoia. May require intervention. January 15, 2025. New acquisition opportunities identified in Sacramento, Portland suburbs. Children's photography workshops provide excellent cover. The figure paused in their work, turning to examine a wall map studded with colored pins. Red pins marked active operations. Blue pins showed historical sites now compromised. Green pins indicated potential future locations. There were far more green pins than red or blue combined. The archive wasn't ending. It was evolving. A phone buzzed on the desk. The figure answered without speaking. Phase 7 is approved, a voice said. Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Spokane are ready. The work continues. The line went dead. The figure returned to the photographs, selecting 3 images of Dana Pierce and placing them in a special folder marked Priority Documentation. In the enhanced images, Dana's face was circled in red ink. Beneath her photograph, someone had written in the same precise handwriting that filled the journal. She sees too much. She remembers too well. Schedule for collection. The figure sealed the folder and placed it in an outgoing mail tray, beside similar folders marked for Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Spokane. Across the country, other basement darkrooms were receiving their new assignments. Other watchers were updating their surveillance equipment. Other predators were reviewing fresh hunting grounds. Margaret Hartwell had tried to expose them in 1987 and died for it. Dana Pierce had tried to destroy them in 2024 and only made them stronger. But the archive's greatest strength had always been patience. They could wait months, years, decades for the right opportunity. They could relocate, restructure, and rebuild as many times as necessary, because in the end, they knew something that their hunters didn't. Everyone eventually stops looking over their shoulder. Everyone eventually lets their guard down. Everyone eventually stands in just the right spot for the perfect photograph. The figure returned to the developing trays where a new image was slowly appearing in the chemical solution. It showed a young girl walking to school, her backpack bouncing with each step, completely unaware of the camera documenting her daily routine. In the corner of the photograph, just barely visible in the background shadow of a parked van, was the silhouette of someone waiting, watching, planning. The work continued. It always continued. And somewhere in Portland, Dana Pierce was about to discover that finding the truth was only the beginning of her nightmare. Final frame. 3 months later, Dana Pierce would disappear while researching a follow-up story about missing children in the Pacific Northwest. Her apartment would be found undisturbed, her car parked normally, her camera equipment laid out as if she'd just stepped away for a moment. The only trace of what happened would be found weeks later by a hiker in Mount Hood National Forest. A single Polaroid photograph lying beside a stream, its emulsion damaged by water but still partially visible. The image showed Dana sitting in an unfamiliar room, her hands zip-tied in front of her, her eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes from finally understanding how deep the darkness goes. On the back of the photograph, in careful handwriting, someone had written, "The archive thanks you for your contribution. Development eternal." The photograph was turned over to the FBI, where Agent Lisa Chen added it to a file that now contained over 300 similar images spanning 60 years. The hunt for the archive continues. The watchers are still watching, and in basements and dark rooms across the country, new photographs are developing in the dark, frame by frame, victim by victim, forever. And based on recovered evidence suggesting a nationwide network of predators who documented their activities through photography. While the specific events in this story are fictional, similar cases have been investigated by law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions. If you have information about suspicious photography activities targeting children, contact your local FBI field office. The photographs remember everything. Sometimes they're all that's left.